The other day I was reading a piece that a new author had written, and as I read that, I was just thinking, man, I wish I had the opportunity to sit with this new author and just say to him, bro, your dialogue sucks. It's hard to get honest feedback, but sometimes we need that. And in this situation, he really needed it.
Writing dialogue can be really tough. And new writers, they often make mistakes that just scream amateur.
Not only new writers, but experienced writers can fall into these 7 mistakes as well. So let's get kicked off with number 7, and that is dialogue tags. This is a common mistake. In fact, if you take a creative writing class, you may be given the advice to come up with, creative ways of putting dialogue tags. A dialogue tag is what you say right after you quote a dialogue, like she said, or he said, or they said. If you're using creative dialogue tags like they whispered or they murmured, it really breaks the reader's concentration and pulls them out of the story. So one of the things that you can do to solve this is just use the word said. It is almost invisible to the reader. It doesn't pull them out of the story, and it gets the point across. So don't be so creative with the tags. You don't have to use a different creative way of expressing it after every line of dialogue. Now, going right along with that is sometimes right after the word said, they want to say lovingly,
happily,
angrily. And the problem is that those words, they're really telling.
Yes.
So don't do that. Just use the word said. And here's a pro tip. Most of the time, especially if it's just 2 people in a conversation, you don't even need a dialogue tag because the back and forth of the dialogue should make it very clear who's speaking.
Yes, you just establish who's talking at the very beginning, and then you don't need to from then on out. Now, number 6 is lack of sensory details within the dialogue. And this is looking at what is happening around the dialogue. What are your characters experiencing? Think the 5 senses. What do they see, hear, smell, taste? Those are the sensory details that you want to add within your dialogue.
But wait a minute, doesn't that violate what we just said?
No.
You don't say said angrily. Is that a sensory?
You don't. No. Instead of saying she said angrily, you would say she said and stomped her foot. And what are the facial expressions that show anger? And what is the body language that shows anger? Those are the things that will show your reader that the character is angry, plus what the character actually says.
So this is a really big place where people dive into telling rather than showing. So be very careful of that in your dialogue. Now, the 5th mistake that new writers make, and sometimes experienced writers fall into this as well, it's kind of funny, but it's not using contractions. Contractions are commonly used in our language. We say them all the time. I can't help but say them. I just did it there. So think about a contraction like I am happy or I'm happy. I will not or I won't. The contracted form is much more natural, especially in dialogue. So don't make the mistake of trying to write the whole thing out. If you can use a contraction in dialogue, definitely do it.
The only exception to this is if you are writing something that is historically accurate, because sometimes historically they did not use contractions. And also if your character is very formal. If your character's formal, then it would be an intentional use of writing it all out. They say every word very, very succinctly, and they don't use contractions. It's a very specific choice. Number 4 is cliches. These are overused words and phrases. You need to be more creative in your dialogue. Some examples are read between the lines.
It's all good.
Don't judge a book by its cover.
We have all kinds of cliches, and these really, they depend on the part of the country you're in maybe, or the age that you're at. I know that sometimes I use cliches in just daily conversations, and my kids look at me like, what are you talking about? But on the other hand, they say weird stuff, and I'm like, I don't even know what you just said. be careful of that in dialogue. Make sure that it's on purpose and it really has a point, right?
It does. Like you can be intentional. Like perhaps your character, you want to date them. Perhaps they grew up in the 80s.
Sweet.
And they've got phrases that were said a lot in the 80s and your character uses them, then it would be intentional. But you want to be careful that you don't overuse them in your dialogue because then it becomes predictable and boring. And we do not want our dialogue to be either one of those things.
Dude, we don't want boring. Number 3 is lack of subtext. Now, subtext is kind of an interesting thing because sometimes we think about dialogue as just the words spoken, but there is so much more going on. Subtext can convey meaning, it can convey emotion, hidden things, and we do this all the time naturally in conversations, but if you don't include it in your dialogue, then your dialogue is going to be really flat. So there should be layers of meaning in the dialogue, and sometimes it has to, go on for a little ways while your reader figures out exactly what that person was talking about. Let me give you a quick example of this. How are you, Angie?
I'm fine. Everything's fine. I'm great.
Is she really fine? I mean, think about all the times that you've asked your spouse that and they come up with some answer and
You know they're not fine.
things are not good right now. But, that's because we have a relationship and the dialogue really has subtext and you're reading into it body language and tone. Well, in writing, you can't always convey it the same because it's not visually happening, but you can put that in subtext in layers.
And that's also where sensory details can help you convey some of that subtext.
This gives you an opportunity to really show what's happening rather than just tell people what's happening.
Number 2 is on-the-nose writing. On-the-nose writing is when you tell everything that's happening. And what this does is it bogs things down, it slows things down. An example of this would be your character, the phone rings and she fishes for the phone and tries to find it and she pushes the button, she answers the phone and she says hello and who's talking? And you can cut to the chase and cut out the on-the-nose writing by just saying she answered the phone.
So dialogue can be a solution to all of that on-the-nose writing.
Yes.
Because you can just say, hello, Sam, or hello, and it's obvious to the reader that the phone rang and she answered it. You don't have to go through all that rigmarole about the doorbell rang and then they got up from their seat and slid the chair in, all of that kind of stuff, right?
Yes, we want to get to the point. You do not have to tell the reader all the minute little details because the reader is smart enough to figure out those details just by saying, hello, who's there? And that can speed up your dialogue.
So the number one mistake that new writers make when it comes to dialogue is not giving the character individual personality. They'll have a bunch of different characters and they all sound the same, they all say the same things, and it kind of makes it monotone or flat.
Or boring.
And it just disconnects the reader. So the way to solve this is to give each of your characters something unique, a unique way they phrase something, a certain word that they say, like y'all. And not everybody needs to say that, just that character. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be just little simple things, maybe a habit that they have, a little tick that they have, or some weird phrase that they say periodically. That kind of makes that character come alive. Now, where I'm originally from, we used to say "warsh," and it just drove her up the wall. But it makes, your character unique when they say something like y'all or warsh or all y'all or, these different phrases depending on where maybe the character is from and what experiences they've had in life. So mix it up, take your characters, make them individual, and it will really add dimension as they communicate with one another throughout your story.
If you like this video, make sure to check out this video about the 10 mistakes that new writers make and how to fix them.